Today we're going to be talking about autism symptoms in girls, why they might get missed, and what that means in terms of a struggle for women on the spectrum to get diagnosed. Just a disclaimer here, which should be obvious, I am not a medical professional. I'm sorry to tell you this, sir, but according to this medical research, that brain is going to have to come out. Secondly, not all autistic women have these traits, and there are many autistic boys and men who do have them. This is purely an observation of how autism can tend to present more in certain ways in girls than in boys. My first clue that I might be autistic came from a YouTube video, from a channel called Invisible Eye, which I'll link down below. So I thought it fitting that I make one now, in the hopes that perhaps I can help someone too. As with all my videos, I feel like if I can help one person, that's a good enough reason to keep going. I was only recently diagnosed just this year. The huge irony of my life is that I did a psychology degree, but back when I did my degree, autism was taught to us as a male condition. The prominent and favoured researcher of the time, Simon Baron-Cohen, yes, he's a cousin of Sasha, was the proponent of the extreme male brain theory. And all we learned about autism was the stereotypical presentation, mostly in boys, of someone who loves trains, numbers, timetables, does weird repetitive movements like hitting their head or flapping their hands, has poor social skills, and is generally kind of a loner. Despite the fact that I had been struggling pretty much throughout my teens and early 20s, and armchair diagnosed myself with a variety of different mental health conditions, from depression to PTSD to borderline personality disorder, it never even crossed my mind that I might be autistic because I just didn't relate to the stereotype that I thought was true. And I really wonder how many autistic people actually do. So let's start by talking about stims. Stims are what a lot of people see on the outside of autism, because they can be not so subtle, maybe quite annoying or weird, or sometimes even violent. We think of stims, which are short for self-stimulatory behaviour, as something abnormal. But many of my own stims are quite normalised, subtle, and can be easily brushed off as quirks. I used to stim a lot more as a child. For example, I would bite or chew or suck my hair, bite the skin off the insides of my cheeks, tap my fingers repetitively. But a lot of these behaviours were something I consciously tried to fix, because they were pointed out to me at some point and I realised they were considered abnormal by my peers. Some of the other stims that I've had at various points in my life include hair fiddling, twiddling, pulling, brushing, nail biting and skin picking, wobbling on my ankles while I stand, pushing into my eye sockets, visual stimming, looking at things that sparkle and move. I love lava lamps, twinkly lights, glittery things, cheek or lip biting, and heel raising. Just because these things are less dramatic somehow than a child hitting his head against the wall, that doesn't make them not real autism. Even though they are just a subtle background noise to my life that doesn't really cause much harm, apart from maybe the skin picking. If you were to tell me I could never do these things again, I would start to get distressed quite quickly. They are little but important behaviours that I am only really just now starting to understand and in some ways respect. So next up is social skills and communication. Girls with autism tend to be pretty good at blending in, mimicking and chameleoning their way through life. During my teenage years, I always felt like I struggled to make friends, but looking back, I did actually have friends. And I was part of a group, but the emphasis is on the struggle that I felt at the time. Even though I was happy with my merry band of weirdos, I hope they won't be offended I called them that, it was still a struggle for me to perform in the right way socially. And I certainly never felt like I could really be myself, except in certain one-on-one situations. But from the outside, since it looked like I had friends, it never occurred to anyone that there might have been a problem there. I should also point out that social and communication difficulties go further than just not having any friends. Other struggles of mine included a total lack of ability to talk to boys. I even suspect there was an element of selective mutism where I literally couldn't speak. And that can still come back today in certain situations. I also struggled to communicate with teachers, and because of my good academic performance and lack of facial expressions, it wouldn't have occurred to any of them that I needed help. I was able to write an essay on a complex topic quite easily, but I couldn't express my basic needs to others, especially to others where I felt there was a power imbalance. Let's also talk about executive functioning issues. because this is something that has been letting me down throughout my life, and I'm only just starting to take the steps required to make the changes I need to organise my life properly. But it's hard, and it doesn't come naturally to me. Executive functioning issues involve difficulty organising things, procrastination, lack of motivation. That list is not exhaustive, and executive functioning concerns involve a whole lot more and is really worth a whole nother video, if not even a whole series on it. How this translated for me at school and university was the typical, let's not start any piece of work until you feel increasingly panicked about it. Which is probably 10 p.m. the night before it's due. My academic ability really masked the struggles that I had with this. And this is one of the only areas where I found myself frequently lying to cover up my failures. I really don't lie in general, I don't like it, but at the time I felt so ashamed because I thought I was lazy. And so I was compelled to lie about why I never did my work on time. I don't know how obvious it was that I was lying. I always tried to come up with excuses that were reasonable and believable, but it made me feel like I wasn't being true to myself. And I usually lied because I was uncertain at the reaction I would get from any given teacher. And that uncertainty provoked a lot of anxiety, I guess. Once you leave education, the executive functioning required to live your life is very different. Any of the temp jobs that I had in my 20s were so easy and boring, they required very little organisation. But as I moved out of student dorms into an apartment and now into a house, my poor executive functioning skills reappeared in the form of, oh crap, how do I keep on top of household tasks? You know, I would try templates that I found online, and where they would have a specific task or chore for a given day. And that would work for a week or so, until I had a visitor or got sick, or something else happened to throw my schedule off. Suddenly I'd missed a day, or a weekend, and I had no idea how to get back on task. I couldn't make these rigid schedules work. And especially as a woman, when you feel like you can't organise your own house, there's a certain sense of shame. Especially these days with social media, when you can see everyone else's immaculate and perfectly organised houses. Next up is special interests. Now, I'm not interested in trains, but at 10 years old I could give you an entire biography of every single Spice Girl. As a 14-year-old I could list every episode of Friends in order, and probably name the guest stars in each episode. As a 17-year-old, I felt emotions bordering on grief when my favourite TV show, Buffy, aired its last episode. From the outside, a girl who liked the Spice Girls or Friends, especially in the 90s when culture was so much more consolidated, was so mainstream, so normal, that I actually felt a little bit silly talking about them in my assessment. Autistic women might not have special interests that raise eyebrows. They might, but they might not. But what marks us as different is the intensity of interest and the level of knowledge in the subject. I also definitely have the tendency to infodump when I get excited about something, which means that I might tell you everything I know about the topic, even if you basically just asked a question to be polite. Moving on to sensory sensitivities. Long before I was diagnosed with autism, I identified as an HSP, a highly sensitive person. I really don't know how much science there is behind this label, but I do suspect that a lot of HSPs might actually be undiagnosed autistic women. My sensory sensitivities are at the core of my daily experience. Even when you take away all other interaction with society, sensory sensitivities affect me on days even when I don't leave my own house. Nowadays, I get to mostly control my own environment, with the exception of my son's volume. But putting me in situations where I can't can make me much more withdrawn. As a young girl, I hated fireworks, I hated the noise. I was a very fussy eater. I didn't like any sauces or condiments or liquids on my food. I hated wearing sunscreen. I even found out when my mum answered the questionnaire for my assessment that she'd had to sew linings into certain clothes that I wouldn't wear because I found too itchy. Now, I have been called oversensitive at various points in my life. But my sensitivity is not just emotional in nature. It's a literal oversensitivity to stimuli. And the final topic is comorbid or wrongly diagnosed mental health conditions. I want to mention these because for a lot of autistic girls who just blend in, these are the things that might give you an indicator that something isn't quite right. Depression and anxiety are rife among autistic people. Because why wouldn't you be depressed and anxious in a world where you know you don't fit in? You know you're wrong somehow, you know you're different, but you don't know why. I constantly felt different, or sometimes even like an alien, when other people discussed their thoughts or experiences. and I just couldn't relate to them. I developed social anxiety because of small, systematic micro-rejections, with the result that I retreated into my own world a lot. Now, that's not to say it was all bad. In fact, I quite enjoyed it. I taught myself HTML. I learned the guitar. I journaled a lot. I enjoyed my special interests. But being aware of why I was different could have made such a difference to me and my self-esteem and the way that I grew up. So this has been an overview of my experience that I believe are common in many women and girls with autism. I hope it has been enlightening to you and maybe made you reconsider your own stereotypes about autism and autistic people. If you enjoyed this video, I have more videos on the topics of autism and neurodiversity in a handy-dandy playlist right here. Handy-dandy. Handy-dandy? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.